Welcome to the ThePPod.
So, welcome to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. My name's Steve Maccabee, and I'm the multi-agency training manager for the SSCP. And I'm joined today by Claire Winter, Executive Director for Children, Families and Education, and of course, member of the SSCP Executive Group, who's here to talk about her role, both in children's services and in relation to the partnership. So, Claire, welcome to the ThePPod.
Thank you. It's nice to see you.
Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate that. And it'd be really good to sort of partly get to know about yourself and your role, but also sort of be exploring some of the issues around safeguarding children in Somerset and some of the sort of some of the focuses, some of the initiatives, some of the pressures on services and how we can kind of really work together to improve safeguarding in Somerset, if that's okay. So I'm just wanting to start off with, I sort of introduced you there as the Executive Director for Children, Families and Education. Could you just provide a bit of a sort of an overview of your role within the local authority and the sort of your key responsibilities in ensuring sort of the well-being of children and families in the region?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head really there, that my responsibility is overall is to ensure the well-being of all children in Somerset. So currently there are about 110, 115,000 children in Somerset. And obviously some of those children require more support than others. Some children and their families are getting on just fine and need minimal support. But others, as we know, need an awful lot of support in terms of ensuring that they're safe in their family home. And for those children who aren't safe, ensuring they have a safe home to live in foster care or residential care. So a lot of people, I think, as you said before, believe that children's services is children's social care services. That is a critical part of the children's services role. But we also are responsible for early help in terms of ensuring that children who and their families who need help early in their life and early in their journey of support get that support as early as possible and as effectively as possible so that they can go back to their lives and manage on their own independently as a family unit without the need for recourse to statutory services. We're also responsible for education to some degree. So we have a role in supporting the schools that still remain with the local authority, which are called maintained schools. There are currently about 130 of those. And we have a role in working with the academised sector and the independent school sector, both for in the private sector in terms of the main private schools, but also in independent non-maintained schools for children who have special needs, special educational needs, and working with children and their families with disabilities. So quite a broad reach.
A fair few things to do then. And in terms of, I don't know if there is such a thing, but is there a sort of typical day, typical week for you? Or is it so vast and broad?
No, it's no typical day, but that's part of the joy of the job. I mean, I love my job. It's really interesting because every day is completely different. And I get to meet a lot of really interesting people. I get to meet the families that we work with. I get to meet school staff, head teachers. I get to talk to children. I'm going this weekend actually to talk to youth parliament to hear their view on what needs to be different effectively in Somerset and in the country and how they feel we should be shaping that agenda. And I get to obviously meet with both all my staff and all the staff who work with a lot of the staff who work in the partnerships. And that's the most exciting bit, is talking to people and understanding their experiences as families and children of the services that we provide, being proud of where we do it well and learning when we don't and thinking, right, okay, how can we do that differently, and listening to their ideas about what we could be doing differently and better. And also talking to people and listening to people in the workforce. I'm really proud of the workforce. I think, we've got a fantastic workforce, which was shown in the Ofsted inspection last year. They are so dedicated to supporting children and their families, to keeping children at home, keeping them safe at home with their families, and ensuring that children have the best possible lives they can. And as I say, I'm incredibly proud of the work that it will do. It's amazing what they achieve.
Yeah, no, it would be good to sort of have a look at that in a moment, sort of about some of that, like you say, the journey that Somerset's been on. But I just think before we sort of get to that, and you've had a long and established career. I was trying to think before we met, actually, when you came into the role of Executive Director of Children's Services from your previous role as Deputy Director. Was it 8 months ago now, or is that completely off the mark?
November 22, so it's about 8-10 months. Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's good. I wasn't too far off the mark then. So, and in terms of your sort of your career journey, from sort of starting off your career to sort of the role that you're in today, could you kind of describe that for people and sort of what your sort of background has been to bring you to where you are?
So I started off my career about 30 years ago as a social worker in the north of England. So I worked in Bolton, which is sort of North Manchester, as a children and family social worker in a really difficult inner city area. It was a bit of a baptism of fire, but it was an amazing experience, a brilliant team to work in, really taught me what teamwork was all about, and how supporting families in really difficult circumstances could look like. I moved from there to other social work roles. I say to people, I've sort of drifted down the country. So I worked in Bolton, then I worked in Warwickshire, then I worked in Worcestershire, and then I came to Somerset.
And you've obviously sort of probably seen a lot of change over that time. And what are some of those sort of changes that you've seen? How have you sort of seen social work practice evolve over the last sort of 30 years or more recently?
Social work tends to go in cycles, I think. So I think when I started practicing, we were in quite a doing to rather than doing with type system. I remember in my social work training an awful lot about power and control and the effective, appropriate use of power, etc., and imbalanced relationships, etc. And working with families at a really high threshold. And a lot of it was about thinking children can't stay at home, they need to come out, and I would exert that control. And I suppose we've gone around that circle over the last, over a lot of years, and are coming back round to actually that doesn't work. When you look at all the data about and the experiences of children who've been in the care system, we know that the outcomes for children who've been in the care system are generally not good. They're overrepresented in the prison system, in homelessness. Their education outcomes are not good for a large majority of those children. And thinking about, well, is it better for these children to be in the care system or not? And obviously, if a child's been seriously abused or it's dangerous for them to be at home, they need to be out of that immediate family environment. But where we can put in support that will effectively support that family to keep that child at home in their immediate family, or to find somebody in their wider family that they can live with rather than in the care system, that's clearly better for that child. And I think that message has sort of come through more strongly over, I'd say, probably the last 10 years, that those messages about the care system isn't that good for children. It's great to keep children safe in an emergency, but actually in the longer term, it's not somewhere that children necessarily thrive. And children drift back to their birth family because that's where they want to be. So trying to get that help in as early as possible so that we don't get to the point where children are suffering, that we get in early to support those families, to put those issues right themselves. Because actually, I know, never been in that situation, but I can only imagine that as a family, when you feel as a parent you're failing, that's a really terrible place to be. And every parent wants to be able to do the best for their child. So trying to get in there early to support people to just tweak those issues at the beginning so that people can actually do a really good job as a parent with the right support and look after their own children and be proud of what they've achieved. And those children achieve better outcomes in education, they have a better life chances, and they've got that family support around them. We all know that when children are in care and they leave care, however hard we try to keep that support around them, sometimes that's not as effective as we'd like it to be. And having your family, and even if we are effective, we're only there till they're 25, that's a quarter of your life if you're lucky. And your family is there for good, aren't they? For good or ill, they're still there. And trying to make that family an effective support mechanism for you so that actually you've got that family there for life. And that they don't repeat the problems of the previous generation. I think that's an enduring issue in social work that we never quite get right. I think we're always trying to work out how do we stop that cycle. And for some families, we succeed, I think, and we put in a lot of effort to try and succeed, and then locally and nationally. But some children, that cycle just perpetuates into adulthood. And we need to really work hard at preventing that happening. And we do have one of the things that we've implemented in Somerset in the last few years is the Pause project, if you're aware of that, which is working with mums mums who've had multiple children removed through the courts, and trying to help them recover effectively from the trauma they've suffered, and also work out how to be a better parent. So the next time if they have more children, they can parent their child throughout their childhood. And there have been some real successes with that. So we've had children who haven't needed a safeguarding plan, haven't needed to come into care, parents who can say, actually, I can do it now, and I can do it well, and I can support other people to do it too. So yeah, there are some really good initiatives out there, as well as some of the trauma and the challenges that people face.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I know, obviously, in my role in the training capacity, spend quite a bit of time sort of reflecting back about where we were and where we are, and sort of providing that context really about actually this is why practice is as it is today, and it's interesting doing that sometimes. But when you do reflect back, you realise actually there's been some quite fundamental shifts in some quite key areas, which over time we just kind of acknowledge as normal practice now. And I think just you were talking there, I was thinking about sort of moving away from that perception of it's all to do with social workers. They're the experts. They need to do the job. And the concept of early help, which relatively new, really, in the grand scheme of things. Where we're going back sort of, I don't know, 10, 15 years or so. But as that kind of really kind of pushed sort of agenda around early help and recognising how much that can support families and the role that we all play. But even things like child sexual exploitation or criminal exploitation are relatively new kind of in the grand scheme of things, concepts, but actually it's, in a way it feels quite strange to say that sometimes when you think, well, actually, of course it makes sense. This is how we work with families, this is how we support families, and sort of moving away from those old conceptions.
Yeah, I think early help was, I think back right to the beginning of my career, it was there, but it was largely created and developed by the voluntary sector. So I remember we had what at the time was called patch social work, by somebody called Professor Roger Hadley, who developed it. And that was about people working in small areas in difficult estates, largely in inner city areas. But in those estates, you had usually a sort of a local house that was run by Bernardo's or a local charity, which provided that early help support network. And they did it really effectively, but it was seen as a voluntary sector role. And then it became part of the sort of statutory sector. And I think we're moving back to a sort of a more balanced system in terms of early help. So we've got the voluntary sector who, let's be honest, are the people who know their communities trust them, communities want to work with them and do a really, really good job. And as you said, social workers have skill sets and are a really valuable resource, but they're not necessarily the expert in that local community. The people who are experts in their family are usually the family themselves, and they know what they need if they have the right connections and the right relationships. And I suppose the other bit that has changed, I'm not sure it's changed, but I think it's become more to the fore as workforces have changed, is that the whole basis of sustainable change in families is strong relationships. And actually having a strong relationship with the people working around you is absolutely critical. And I suppose 20, 30 years ago, there were a lot of social workers and people tended to stay in the same job for some time. So it wasn't necessarily something we thought about as a profession about, we need to make sure we've got relationships, because it just happened. With a more transient workforce, as people move a lot more between jobs, it's become really to the fore. But actually what we really need to do is retain that workforce, not just social workers, but everybody working around families. So they have got that relationship and they can sustain that relationship with somebody that they can trust and talk to. And that happens across the whole sector, doesn't it? In terms of people like GPs, who everybody knew who GP was, probably most people don't now, because there's a crisis in GPs as well, in primary care and in health visiting and other parts of the sector. So that whole focus now on relationship-based practice is critical to getting it right for families. It's always been there, but never previously, probably only the last 10 years, isn't it, roughly, that we've seen it as so important, because it's been something that has been a struggle over that time period, whereas previously it just happened. It was just normal practice.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point, isn't it? And like I say, I always say to people, the greatest resource that you have to work with families is you. Full stop. And actually, it's about how you invest in that and sort of build that resource through that professional working relationship we have with somebody. But I think it's a really, really good point about that sort of the shifting workforce and sort of how we sort of, like I say, have to work quite hard to make sure we establish that relationship. But also, when those relationships do change and a new social worker needs to come in or something like that's done in a very sort of sensitive and managed way. Sort of recognising quite often children, young people might have sort of very, very sort of chaotic experiences of life already themselves and relationships.
Yeah, and I think there's also something about ending those relationships as well, that actually you might need a social worker at some point, but actually it's not good for anybody to have a social worker coming in and add to their life for the whole of their childhood. We need to be able to say, okay, we'll stay as long as we need to for social workers. And then we'll find people in your local community who can support you, that are local people that you feel comfortable with, who are going to be there to just, rock up and have a chat with at the youth club or whatever for the rest of your childhood. Because we all know there's a stigma attached to having a social worker in your life. And when it's needed, that's great. And you need to have that resource, and we'll provide that to support you. But it's better to have people in your local community that you can rely on and build those local relationships, because they're long lasting and sustainable, and they'll work better for you in the end.
There's a lot of challenges in terms of the work that you do and your teams that you oversee do. And what would you say are some of the sort of greatest challenges at the moment in terms of kind of providing those kind of effective support services for children, young people?
Well, I suppose at the moment they're the standard ones that probably everybody has said to you. So the impact of COVID, I think we're still seeing the impact of COVID. It feels like sort of COVID was the pebble in the pond, and we're now feeling the ripples. And those ripples are not going away. That the impact, particularly on children's, I'd say emotional health and well-being rather than just mental health, it is clearly really significant, and seems to be very enduring. That sort of shockwave of COVID has had a really significant impact on children. And I think it's at all age groups as well. So I think teenagers, you can see it very clearly because teenagers are able to verbalise it more clearly than maybe younger children. And you can see it in the way that they behave in terms of their struggles with their emotional health and well-being and their relationships for some children. And I think for younger children, if you think about children and their parents, children who were born in 2021, where they were probably very, very isolated, have very little social contact, very little social support in terms of their parents and contact with other children for those younger children. And we're starting to see some of those children coming through into sort of preschool settings, and to some degree, some of those children going to sort of early years education, where there are significant issues that we probably wouldn't have seen to the same degree before in terms of socialization, development, and families who are really struggling in a way that we haven't seen before. And when you add on to that the cost of living crisis and that increase in pressure on families and poverty, we're definitely seeing both in the early help system and in social care and in schools, I think, to be fair, families struggling who we would never have had any contact with at all before, because it's just pushed it into another level of people who would previously not have come to our attention. And I think we have to think about the ways we work as well with families, because the pandemic has had a real impact on people, and it's not necessarily a standard social work methodology that needs to go into those families anymore. It's a broader range of skill set in terms of helping people it's almost recovering from the trauma of COVID, isn't it? It's about trauma-informed practice. So trauma, we tend to think of, as heavy-hitting abuse, but actually the pandemic was a trauma, and some people experience that trauma in very different ways to other people. And when you layer on top of that the cost of living crisis and the impact of that, as you said before, child exploitation, that's become, over the last 5 to 8 years, I suppose, in Somerset, it's become a bigger issue. And I think the pandemic increased it. The people who run those child exploitation rings became very adept very quickly at exploiting those very vulnerable children. But there was some really good stuff that came out of our understanding of that. I can remember in 2020 when the pandemic first started, I think it was the police actually and district councils came to me in my social care role at that time and said, we can see that vulnerable children are sort of out on the streets when they should be indoors. They're not in school because there's no school place for them. They're not quite vulnerable enough to be in school. They're on the edge of getting into trouble and the edge of this criminality and being vulnerable to these gangs. And there was a brilliant project that was district councils, the police, the voluntary sector, the local authority, where we identified these groups of vulnerable kids and individual children. We identified, I think, about 150, 200 children that we actually worked with, where we said, okay, let's just go and individually go and meet up with these children, talk to them, work out what they're interested in, what they can do, how we can support them. And I think it was really interesting to me, that project, because the people who were the best at engaging with those children were PCSOs. Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely fantastic with those children, really built strong relationships. And youth workers who were out and doing sort of detached youth work. And the work they did with those young people was incredible. They got them opportunities to do things like, I don't know, bike repairs in local bike shops. I remember one boy was really interested in carpentry, came out at the end of it having made a cabinet. It was, and he was so proud of it. And it also encouraged those children to go back into school. So when they went back into school, they said they could see they had a skill set. They weren't the child on the edge. They were the child who could say, I am good at something and I'm going to work hard at school because I actually want a vocation and a role that I can see I can now achieve. So there were good things that came out of the pandemic too.
It's been really interesting, I think. Like I say, I think you're absolutely right that we're seeing the ripples of that coming out and coming out in so many different ways. Some of them positive, like you say, some of them actually very, very difficult for children, young people and their parents. And society as a whole, really. And I think more and more is coming out in terms of, like I say, not just speech and language, but in terms of social skills, communication skills between older young people, but also in terms of staff turnover. A lot of people taking retirement at that point and feeling like, actually, here's an opportunity to change. So I think there's so many times I'm talking to people now and you suddenly go, oh, actually, yeah, that has had that knock-on effect. And like you say, actually, in terms of COVID, recognising that it had an effect on everybody, but that effect was very, very different for many, many people. And sort of recognising that and being able to adjust and work with that is quite a challenge, I think.
Yeah, I think it is a challenge. And I think we also have to remember that it also affected all our staff as well.
Yes.
So everybody experienced it together. And I think that was, I suppose that example is a good example of the support that people gave each other professionally. But I was really impressed with how everybody supported each other in that work environment. I can remember, there's terrified calls that everybody had in sort of March, April 2020 in terms of how are we going to continue to deliver services to family, because we have to do that. And what's really a very dangerous situation for our staff and our partner staff. And the way people pulled together and how they supported each other and came up with really creative ways of supporting each other and keeping each other safe and keeping an eye on each other and, sort of team meetings online and support groups online, etc., across services to help each other through it. I think it was amazing. And I was very proud of the fact that, we had a culture that enabled that to happen. And people were able to do that and able to offer ideas and to challenge when we got it wrong, because we, as everybody did, sometimes got it wrong. But people felt able to say, actually, I don't think that's the right thing to do there. Let's talk about that. Maybe we need to do it differently. You've probably got a better idea. So I think there were good things that came out of that. Yeah,
and I think that came through a bit in the thematic child safeguarding practice review that took part at that time, where sort of looking against the national picture, it highlighted, of course, real pressures on services, but also some of the kind of areas of concern that we identified nationally in terms of a lack of eyes on children, lack of identification of those highest at risk, but importantly, actually, what about the other children? And at that point in time, we were expecting, and the forecast were about 50% loss in workforce, at any one point in time through COVID. And so, but I think that came through in the thematic review, is that identification of those most at risk children, but also then through the linked professional initiative to identify those other agencies who were able to have eyes on those other children who are still very vulnerable, but couldn't be sort of placed in that highest kind of priority of need at that point. And I think often we tend to focus on when things go wrong, and of course we should and do learn from those, but identifying good practice as well and learning from that is really key.
Very important, yeah.
So I'm just thinking, in terms of alongside your role as executive director for Children's Services, I mentioned at the start there that you're part of the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnerships Executive Group, alongside your colleagues in the police and health. I'm just wondering what sort of differences have you seen following the introduction of the partnership arrangements from working together to safeguard children in 2018, and sort of bringing together those three statutory partners. And I guess there's sort of another question leading on from that is sort of what would be your aspirations for the partnership moving forward?
I think the safeguarding exec, if you like, bringing those three statutory partners together has been, I think it's been helpful in terms of building those relationships at a strategic level. So deepening those relationships and having a clearer sort of strategic view about what needs to be different in Somerset. So I think that's been useful. I think the other aspects of the partnership, I think the youth forum has been really helpful in terms of being able to have young people's voices about particular issues and understanding what they think and how things need to be different. I think what we've lost is a wider sort of system understanding of safeguarding and active engagement in that safeguarding partnership. And I know it was patchy before, which is why it moved to this partnership model when we had the board. But I think there was a wider understanding and a broader engagement in different agencies in the safeguarding arena. I don't think that's necessarily something we can't replicate, and that will be one of the things I'd want to develop again in terms of the safeguarding partnership, in terms of how do we ensure that other agencies are actively involved, and we have those discussions on a more regular basis with other partners about what are the things that worry you about safeguarding children. What are the things that you think we do well as a partnership? How can we improve those? Because I think, as I said before, it is now all about supporting children in their own communities, and the police and the ICB and the local authority are not the main players in very small local communities. We need to be engaging people who are in those local communities, the voluntary sector, faith sector, schools, etc., to how do we, as the big player hitters in the system in terms of budgets, although they are limited, of course, how do we support you to support those families in the community?
And that's obviously quite a strong emphasis from central government as well, like you say, in terms of that community support and development. And like you say, I think it's about how the partnership as a whole can support that as well. Is really crucial. Brilliant, thank you. And it's it'll be interesting to see, I think, with the changes to working together that will be published later on this year. And I was surprised that actually they didn't go as far as I thought they would. I thought they'd certainly bring in quite strong aspects from the independent inquiry for child sexual abuse in England and Wales. I know it brought in some aspects of the national review from Josh McAllister. And I know some of the proposals around that as well were for education to become a statutory safeguarding partner moving forward. I was surprised to see a lot of those elements not included this year, but I know the plan is then to update working together on an annual basis. And what are sort of some of the developments you think will come in over future years with that?
And I think the education one is critical. And certainly we are talking to people in the education sector about how we could create that role in our executive, even though it's not yet statutory. I think it is a big gap. And that's something I really want for the exec to develop, having that education lead there. I think why it's taking time for it to get into working together in any significant form and also in local partnerships is because it's quite tricky.
Yes.
The education sector is huge. And I started off by thinking, well, it's similar to health because it's just full of, different types of smaller bits, if you like, that make up the whole sort of health sector. And you have the education sector. And we manage it with health, so why can't we manage it with education? But actually, it's not quite the same, is it? Because health is a governed organisation. It is the NHS. They're all part of the same thing. And the school sector has, over the last few years, become quite splintered in terms of maintained schools, academies, independent schools, the SEND agenda, etc. So having one person to represent all those different aspects and the different age groups and the different needs of those children is pretty tricky. So we are working with the education sector to say, okay, let's just think about this. Is there somebody who'd be willing to try so that we can learn from that experience to work out what it needs to look like going forward? We have got a couple of people who are interested in thinking about trying that out. But, most children spend more of their life in schools than they do anywhere else. And those relationships with school staff are probably some of the most critical relationships in their life. And, most of us can remember the name of at least one teacher that was really important to us as a child. So having that education sector represented on the Safeguarding Partnership at that executive level, so that we understand the issues in the education sector, that what they're worried about in terms of safeguarding children, how they feel they could be better supported, how they can better support children, how we can support them to do that, and how they fit into that wider picture, how we can be assured, because part of the partnership's role is to be assured of the safety of children in all the different areas of children's lives, and how do we seek that assurance effectively from all those different aspects of the education sector. We have audits, don't we, 157, 175 audits, but do they actually tell us what's really going on in education environments? Any audit's quite a sterile document. You need dialogue, don't you, with people in that sector on a regular basis. And I think that's something we need to develop, hopefully through that role. But I think that role will develop and evolve. It may not be enough to have just one person. We may need to do something different. But I'm very much for let's try. Let's not sit here and make it perfect. Let's try it out. Let's help somebody into that role and see what we learn and how we need to develop it and change it to get it right, so that we do get the education sector's voice and the voice of children in schools. Because actually, as we've talked about, peer-on-peer abuse can happen in schools. Children can need safeguarding in schools. That's the ICSA inquiry evidence too. So, getting all those factors into one place so that we can actually consider them as part of the overarching strategy around safeguarding, I think is critical.
I think you're right. And like you said, I know it's been an issue that's been debated since 2018 and earlier around education becoming a statutory safeguarding partner. And I know certainly from the update, the recent update and the consultation, there's certainly an appetite for the Department for Education to include education. Like you say, it's just recognising it's complex and it needs some really careful thinking about in order to get it right. And we know, there's a huge amount of responsibilities placed on schools, on education, through keeping children safe in education. And it's like you say, how we kind of bring education in as part of that statutory or part of the executive group, even if it's not statutory at this point in time, I think is really key. And I think it's great that sort of initial work is starting, even though it's not a statutory responsibility now, to start looking at how we can bring that in Somerset.
Yes, I think it's really, really important to get that right. And I think the other area that the other group of people, if you like, that we need to bring on board at a more senior level, if you like, is the voluntary, community and faith sectors, because they are critical to our communities and are part of that wider safeguarding brief to a huge degree. And although they have a voice, I think their voice could be amplified, and we should be working with them more effectively as a partnership to make sure that we have the right voluntary community sector services in the right places. They know what's needed in those communities probably better than we do. We should be listening really hard to what they're saying and working with them to ensure that we have got the right support in the right places, as I said. And obviously, money's an issue. We don't, as a partnership, and individual agencies don't have bottomless pits of money to provide. So we do have to increasingly target our resources, as does everybody, but listening to all those voices in the communities and in schools and health and police to make sure that actually between us, we're working out where are the right places to target these resources and being agile enough to amend that when required. Not knee-jerk reaction, but listening to those voices about, that the demographic or the culture or what's going on in communities is changing. We need to move, and we need to move in an agile, flexible way to actually make sure we've got the right resources where children and families need it, rather than waiting for something terrible to happen and going, oh, right, if we'd done something earlier, then, so I think that's important.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you. And I have to say, I think, and I've been back in Somerset now working in Somerset for 8 years, came back in 2015. And I think since that time, there's been a huge amount of development within children's services that I've certainly seen. And obviously, acknowledging going from an inadequate Ofsted through to that journey of progression through to good now, and very much that developing that learning culture. And I think I've seen a lot of a lot of sort of different ways of working, a lot of new initiatives within that time. Are there any of those kind of initiatives that you kind of are particularly proud of, or kind of see a really positive impact on families?
I think family safeguarding has been absolutely amazing. So for people who don't know, family safeguarding is an initiative that started in Hertfordshire. And it basically brings in adult practitioners around drugs and alcohol, domestic violence and mental health, and places them in social work safeguarding teams. And they become part of that team, and they work as part of that team to support the parents of the children in those safeguarding teams to try and help parents recover from those issues at an early point, when they previously would have had to wait probably to get much more severely affected by those issues to access an adult service. And by that time, the children may be damaged to the point where the family can't keep them at home with them. So we've seen a really significant impact from that initiative. It was meant to launch in March 2020.
Quite a quiet time at that point in time, not much to do.
Nothing else to do. Yeah. So we thought we'd do that, yeah. So we did actually delay it until October 2020. But we thought at that point that was still quite brave because the country was still very locked down. So we did launch it virtually. And again, I was so proud of all those teams and all the adult workers and all our partners who were providing those adult workers, as well as the social work teams, in how creative they were in integrating those teams in a virtual way. But the impact on children and families has been huge in terms of the numbers of families where those adult workers and social workers have worked together to reduce those behaviours and those traumas that those adults have experienced in addictions, and the impact on children, so they can actually stay at home. And we don't have to go into court. Those children don't have to go and live somewhere else. And families are recovering to the point where they can say, we don't need you anymore. We've recovered enough. We can do this on our own, which is the end goal, really, isn't it? You want a family to be able to stand on their own feet and go, we can do this. We've got enough support around us that we've created for ourselves. And the feedback from families is really encouraging. And children, I can't remember who it was, but a child said to an adult worker that they were really glad that they were there because actually they were there for their mum. And the social worker was there to help the family, but actually his mum needed some help just for her. And he knew that worker was in there just for her, and they were helping her. And that made him happy because actually he knew his mum needed help. So just having those sorts of bits of feedback from children that actually they can see this is having a really positive impact on their family, it gives them hope for the future that they'll be able to stay at home and it'll be okay. And it's the feedback from social work teams as well about the impact of that work on the morale in social work teams and their feeling of being able to achieve what they want to for those families. Because, social workers in Somerset are very ambitious for their families. They want them to be able to live on their own and have that, help their children thrive. And that lack of resource, because they quite rightly, at that point, they were not meeting an adult services threshold, was a sort of endless frustration. Social workers, the reason we implemented it was because social workers said, we just need some resource from adults. We just need to get this adult resource. So that's been fantastic for morale. And the adult workers working in those teams absolutely love it. Their feedback is this is just a great way to work because we can see the impact on the whole family, and that we're all working together to actually support and help that family out of difficulty.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something I certainly see in social workers that I talk to is that real pride in the work they do. And in the initiatives and development. And I think alongside that as well with the family safeguarding model was the introduction of the motivational interviewing that came in. And obviously we've done some interviews with Jackie Webb, the MI trainer. And I know that's had a really positive impact across the workforce as well, in that confidence to work with some very, very difficult situations, but have the confidence that actually they can go into those situations really armed with those really good skills to be able to kind of work with families to help them, support them, to find their solutions and have that sustained change moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's been a really good, brilliant initiative of the motivational interviewing. And Jackie Webb has been an excellent trainer, I think. Certainly when we started it, I did the training alongside all my staff. It was a 3-day course. And it was very interesting. You could see some people were very natural in their understanding of motivational interviewing and the ability to adapt and use that questioning style. And some people just aren't. I'm one of the people who just aren't. I've had to work very, very hard at that questioning style to be able to do it. And it needs a lot of rehearsal and repetition and practice. But it is a really effective way of communicating with people and empowering people to make their own decisions and to understand their own frailties and how to deal with those and seek the support that they need. Yeah, so I am really pleased that we took that on because it has worked brilliantly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you. I think sort of moving forward then, so you've been in your role since November of last year. Obviously very experienced as the deputy director for many years. But I'm just wondering sort of about your sort of goals and aspirations moving forward for Children's Services in Somerset. Sort of, are there any sort of new initiatives on the horizon or anything that anybody should be aware of?
I think it's trying to improve everything we do. I think we've got the foundations in place across children's services in most sectors. We need to improve and we need to be creative and innovative. You know, we're working, as we said, very difficult times in terms of the increased levels of need. And we are working in straitened financial times where there is less money available to do the things for more people, basically. So I think in terms of the services that we provide, we need to make sure that we are including the people that need to be included so that we have children included in their communities where we've got families who are separated or seen as different. So we work very hard with those community sectors to make sure they are included. And also with children with special educational needs and disabilities. They are part of the community. They are not separate. They need to feel that they are part of their community, both in school and at home. And making sure that they have the support and resource that they need to feel supported and that their families have that resource to be able to look after them. I think in terms of schools, we have got quite significant issues in education. We have some very poor education results. We have very high exclusion rates in Somerset and quite poor school attendance post-pandemic. We're working really hard and schools are working incredibly hard to try and pull that round, to look at how we can actually increase that inclusion in school, effectively, that children feel that school's the place they want to be, that staff have the skills to be able to educate them, but also to look after them, and that we put the support around schools to make sure that we do have that education support in there. And I think one of the things we're doing there is the Connect Somerset initiative, which is about early support and building those community supports and resilience around schools, is making sure that those champions for Connect Somerset are wrapped around schools, looking at schools with schools, saying what do you need to support these children to stay in your school, so that children are educated locally, that they're not separated, placed somewhere where they're away from their community, that they don't develop those peer relationships, which gives children resilience, doesn't it? That's what having your mates around you is a really strong resilience factor. And if you're in some special school away from your locality, then actually you probably don't develop those relationships in the way that you might do. Some children, I accept, do need to be in a separate institution, but not all. And we need to try and improve that inclusion in schools. And then I suppose the final bit is around thinking about the children in our care and our care leavers. I think we do well with a lot of those children, but we need to bring them home. We have too many children placed outside Somerset and too many children in residential care because of a lack of sufficiency of foster carers, which is a national problem. So again, we're doing a lot of work in encouraging people to be foster carers for Somerset, to look after our children locally in Somerset. And we also have the Homes and Horizons work that we're doing with the Shore Trust, developing children's homes run by the Shore Trust with us for our most complex children, to bring those complex children back to Somerset locally so that they have those local support networks which are sustainable into adulthood. So I think we are doing a lot of things to try and improve those outcomes for children. And people are working incredibly hard to get it right. I recognise that in some places we're not getting it right. And we are listening. I am listening to parents when they tell me, actually, some of these things are not working well. And when staff say, actually, we could do things better and differently. And I think one of the things that I am proud of is that I'm quite an available leader. And I'm happy for people to challenge me from, anywhere in the organisation at any level, and to have that conversation, because actually the people on the front line, the families that know their children, and the workers that know the families that work with those children, the school staff in schools that know those children, probably have the best ideas about what needs to be different. And I need to listen to them, and I need to understand, and I do listen to them to understand, okay, what is it that we could do differently here that would improve your ability to work effectively with those families and improve those children's lives? Because after all, what we're all here for is to improve those children's lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And I'm just wondering, just to round off, I guess, I'm thinking if, obviously we talked about your career and how that sort of spanned the last 30 years or so. I'm just wondering if someone's listening today is interested in beginning a career in social work or has recently started their own journey. I know Somerset have got a lot of sort of apprenticeships running. And what advice would you give them that you wish you'd known when you'd sort of first started out on your journey?
I'd say it's the best job in the world, social work. Slightly biased, but it's a great job working with children and families. I think I would say stick with it. There are going to be hard patches. Sometimes it's a really tough job. You need a really good team around you. I'm confident in Somerset that people would have a really good team around them to support them, and focus on the good that you're doing. That there are some fantastic outcomes when I think back about things that have happened to families that I've worked with. I'm really proud of how I've supported them to do that. And you'll carry that with you forever, that you've actually helped a family achieve and be a family and not be split up. And I think that's the most important message, really, for anybody who works with children and families is focus on doing the right thing for those families, for getting them to a place wherever you can. Keep the children safe, but ensure that as best you can that they can be in a family environment where they can feel safe and supported and they know that they've got trusted adults around them. And if you can set that up for them and with them, then you've set them up for life. You've given them that opportunity to have a great life throughout their adult life too.
Brilliant. I think that's a good point to sort of bring things to a close then. So, well, Claire, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. So I know you've got a very, very busy agenda as always, but we really appreciate you taking a bit of time out just to come and talk to everybody today. So thank you very much. And if you're up for it again at some point in the future, it'll be great to talk to you again.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Claire, and take care.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye. As always, if you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episode, go to the SSCP website at somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk or by following any of the links in the description. If you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in future episodes, we'd love you to get in touch with us at theppod@somerset.gov.uk. My thanks again to my guest today, Claire Winter, Executive Director for Children and Families and Education for Somerset Council and member of the SSCP Executive Group, for coming to talk to us. My thanks as well to you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee and I'm the Training Manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I look forward to you joining us again next time at ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.